Every culture produces its own mythologies and its own fantastic stories. And so the fantastic is a beautiful place to be bringing diversity into the classroom, even when, perhaps especially when, diversity isn't the central topic or theme that you're looking for. Because that's another important thing. Diversity shouldn't be something that's presented in this tiny category of multicultural and diverse literature, because that suggests that this literature is other, that there's mainstream literature, and then there's this little subsection, which is diverse and multicultural literature. And that's not the sort of message that we want to be bringing to kids through stories. As so many of you have already said, books are a place where you found a sense of belonging or identity when you were a kid. These are places where all of us who were looking for how to fit in, where to belong, could find stories that we would identify with, stories that would help us in that journey. And I think all of us want to enable our students to go on those journeys themselves. And how do we do that? Well, we do that by just having a range of literature that represents all of the students that you will be teaching, so that they can find themselves everywhere and not find themselves categorized as only one thing. So how do we do that in fantasy? What's going on with fantasy? Well, fantasy is about reflecting intangible truths of culture, which is another thing your textbook says. And culture embraces all of the aspects of multicultural literature, right? Because it's your race, your religion, your language, your ability, your sexuality, your gender identity, and all the different ways these are socially constructed. Those are intangibles of culture, which is what fantasy represents better than anything else. So, if the fantastic is about illustrating these intangible aspects of culture, it can be a strength to showcase the sort of mythologies and fantastic stories that are produced by different groups. It can also be a bias. So perhaps one of the central examples is Tolkien. Tolkien, who is the godfather of fantastic literature in English, stereotypes Asian and Middle Eastern people in his Lord of the Rings collection. And so being aware that both of these things can happen, what do? Do we just ignore fantasy literature altogether? No. As your book suggests, a way to respond to what can be very problematic in fantasy literature is to have just a diverse spread of texts that students can choose from, and to be upfront and direct with problematic issues as it's appropriate for age groups. We don't have to shy away from these things. We don't have to pretend they're not happening. In fact, we should address them in ways that are age appropriate and correct in a classroom or library setting or whatever it may be. But understanding, hey, this is there, and no book's going to be perfect, but every book could have something to offer if we deal with these academically correctly. That's a negotiation that you will be making from now on in your classroom setting. And the good news is you're not alone in this. There are resources, there are people you can reach out to. And one of the places that you can be looking for it is actually the authors who are producing these texts, because they often confront these issues head on and talk about where they struggled and what they're not sure of, and having that from the author and even being able to share that with your class when it's appropriate. Like Jennifer Koldenko, whose Al Capone Does My T-Shirts is loosely based on her life with an autistic sibling. She addresses the obstacles in writing about neurological diversity in the classroom. and being able to bring up her discussion alongside her book is a really great way to open up that discussion, with the author saying, hey, here's what I tried to do, here's what I'm not sure of, here's how I feel personally about this. All of those are excellent inroads for talking with your students and beginning these conversations, along with just a broader understanding of fantasy and the graphic novel or fantasy literature. So here are some thought questions as we're going forward this week, thinking about how is fantasy able to help students appreciate, enjoy, celebrate diversity. How is it able to help them find themselves or identify with something? So one way it's able to do that is in something like Mother Bruce, where all of the creatures, all of the characters are non-human. That sort of allows a blank slate that any child could identify with these characters. It can be problematic in many ways, as the bear wants to eat the goslings, but that's one way to do it. Another way to do it is to just have a broad range of texts, because no text is going to address everything, but every text is going to address something. I'm going to speak to some of your students, and having that sort of collection available and reading that sort of collection regularly is going to allow students who identify different ways to feel included within your class. So, finally, where do you find these wonderful texts? Because the majority of children's literature does not line up with the demographics that we're seeing in our schools. More than 50% of students in your schools, and in fact 50% of students in public schools as you are going to school, do not identify as white. And yet far more than 50% of children's literature does reflect a white child as the central protagonist or the hero. And so there is a imbalance in the students you're going to see in your classroom and the texts that are available to you. How do you deal with that? How do you address that? One of the tools available to you are award-winning books. Award-winning books that have been picked by organizations that are devoted to celebrating specific groups. And so looking at these are some ethnically and racially diverse awards that are available for American literature for kids. Looking at these is a place to see how texts have been voted, nominated by these groups as, yeah, this is an excellent text for you to have. This is sending a very positive message. This is sending a very relevant message to students. This is a place to start. You can, if you can't get them in your classroom, you can request them in local libraries. You can request them through different agencies. These different awards have links that say, hey, if you need help funding this at your school, let us know. We have some options. Because these award-winning books are also aware of how hard it is to get these books in the hands of students. So know that there's options, know that there's things that are there to help you. We can all do this together.